Have you ever been so mad at someone that you wanted to drag their ass all the way to the court to make them pay for whatever they did to you? I mean, right, we've all considered the idea of that, at least. But have you ever been so mad at someone that even their passing away couldn't satisfy your thirst for revenge or justice, or however you wanna call it? Some of you? Yeah, probably. Or more likely, most definitely. But not many of you would have the cojones to do something like that. But not our friend Pope Stephen VI. He in fact had the cojones to do that and then some. Yeah baby, we're back with those kinds of stories. So stick around till the end to see what the hell happened and how the hell it happened. But before I continue any further, why don't you subscribe and like the video? Help a guy out, would ya? Anyway, being a pope sounds like a great gig, right? You go around the world on these great tours. Well, not now with all these lockdown and restrictions around us, but you know, before that. Visiting different cultures, different segregations, different churches, famous historical sites and all that good stuff, right? Sometimes you would meet the other world leaders and discuss religious people in their land. Or sometimes you would even meet the other religious leaders and talk about some different religious and pious stuff. Right, sounds like an awesome job. And with all that included, you're the right-hand man of the god, so you're a pretty big deal. You just drive your papamobile and wave here and there, looking at the sights. Well, unless you're John Paul II, he got shot in his backyard in Vatican City. Although he did survive, but I can imagine being shot doesn't sound so pleasant. And that's the most notable attempt of assassination on any pope in the recent history, more like in the recent hundreds of years. All in all, being pope is quite chill. But back in the day, and I mean way back in the day, like thousands of years back in the day, it sure as hell wasn't. In fact, during that period, from the middle of 9th century to the late 10th century, or according to some other historians, late 11th century, it was called, and I shit you not, pornocracy. The other name was also the Dark Age, but pornocracy sounds much stronger, you know, and there's a quite valid reason why they called it like that. The rule of prostitutes, as it was called. Because corruption back in the day was even worse than nowadays. It was almost in the open. The Theophylacti family had a lot of sway back in the day. In fact, some of the popes and other notable roles around that were ruled by them. Especially the wife of Theophylact, Theodora, and her daughter Marozia had a huge sway over the influence on the selection of popes and other religious affairs. And the opinion of women back in the day was not so great. Hence the pornocracy, the rule of prostitutes. Anyway, our cadaver synod revolves mostly around Bishop and later Pope Formosus. Just in case you haven't figured it out already, cadaver synod stands for cadaver trial, meaning trial of dead body. It even has a fancy Latin name, Synodus Horrenda. Pope Stephen VI was the accuser and the accused was Pope Formosus. Well, late Pope Formosus, since he was on his spiritual journey at the time. It all began during the rule of Pope John VIII in 1872, during which our guy Formosus was only a bishop of Porto Santa Rufina. But he was also a missionary tasked with spreading Catholicism through Bulgaria. In fact, he was so good at it that Pope John VIII suspected him of violating the law which prevented bishops from ruling more than one place. It was in fact a common law placed in order to limit bishops' ability to have their own fiefdoms and gaining more power and thus more sway over political and religious affairs. And to top it all off, he was also accused by Pope John VIII of openly aspiring to a papal seat, which was a big no-no at the time. You had to be a pious bastard like the rest of them and hide your wrongdoings pretty well while secretly building your connections with the right powerful families. And truth be told, Formosus was guilty of all of that, since he was still a bishop of Porto Santa Rufina, while also building his own influence in Bulgaria, making himself de facto the only person responsible for converging Bulgarians and influencing King Boris. So our old pal Formosus got excommunicated by Pope John VIII. And as it turns out, paranoid John was right in limiting the ability of bishops having more fiefdoms and targeting Formosus, but unfortunately for him it didn't help him save his life. He was assassinated in quite an interesting fashion. He was poisoned, and since they hired an assassin with patience of a 4-year-old child with ADHD, he couldn't wait for poison to take effect. So he did the next best thing. He bashed his skull with a hammer. I mean, like, what's the point of trying to poison him if you have Thor's hammer in your hands? Just start hammering. Anyway, John was now dead, and the next couple of popes had a rather short life expectancy. Who could have predicted it? I mean, at this point even a mouse that lives for only 1 year had a better and brighter future than a new pope prospect. Next in line was Marinus I, who brought back Formosus as a bishop. Just as I said, you just have to be patient and be on the good side of the right powerful family, and all is good and well. After that came Saint Adrian III, who lasted, you guessed it, just 1 year before he too was poisoned. After him, Pope Stephen V, who also didn't last that long. After all of them, now it was Formosus' turn. It paid off to lay low all these years, and he lasted 4 full years before he died of natural causes, which is quite commendable since the world around him was falling apart. Everyone wanted a piece of Rome, well, or rather Rome's treasury that was already sacked 50 years prior. After him came Boniface VI, truly an idiot. He lasted 15 whole days before they had to assassinate him. You could say they had to do it in order to save Rome rather than to gain something from it. He was caught not once but twice in an immoral act with another man's wife. The second time being with femme fatale, which left him fatally wounded. And now we get to our second main actor, Pope Stephen VI. Now if you have to remember any name from this story, it's this guy and Formosus. And the first thing he did as a pope was to dig up Formosus' body, now in his 7th month of decomposition, in order to stand trial for the crimes that Pope John VIII accused him way back in the day. Now he did this for several reasons, mainly 3. The first one being that he wanted to get on the good side of all of those families who hated Formosus in order to secure his spot as a pope and subsequently his life. The second reason being that he wanted to secure his own ass, because he was guilty of all the things that he was accusing Formosus of doing, holding 2 titles. Now in his brilliant mind he thought that accusing him of all those things would divert the attention from his own wrongdoings, while forgetting the fact that if he found Formosus guilty of the things and excommunicated him, his own papal position would be turned null. Well, Formosus was the one who appointed Stephen the title of a bishop, so if you invalidate everything that Formosus did, you invalidate your own papal position. And the third reason, the one that ties everything in and the one that becomes more noticeable as this shit show continues, is that Stephen was a batshit crazy. So this is how it all went down. He ordered people to dig him up, dress him appropriately in all the vestments and sat him on a chair. And since he was not able to defend himself, or rather speak for himself, since he was fucking dead, he was given a church deacon to represent him. He was just there, standing, not doing much. I mean, even if he wanted, he couldn't, while Stephen was walking around and yelling at the corpse. At one point, it was noted that he turned to the corpse and yelled, "While you were Bishop of Porto, why did you usurp universal Roman See with such ambition?" Now here's a little reenactment to make it crystal clear how stupid it all looked like. While you were Bishop of Porto, why did you usurp universal Roman See with such ambition? Tell me why. Object. Nothing. Don't mind me. Just standing here, looking pretty. Ooh, a flower. Now it was worth noting that during this trial there was even an earthquake that shook Basilica, but even that did not deter Stephen and he did not stop. Now Formosus was found guilty on all charges. I know, what a shock, who would have guessed with such good defense, but what can you do? He was stripped of all his vestments and Stephen even took it upon himself to cut the 3 fingers from his right arm. Now this cutting his 3 fingers was what invalidated Stephen as a pope, since it was meant to invalidate everything that Formosus done or ordained, and one of those things was naming Stephen a bishop. Oh my god, what a fucking idiot, I can't even. Now at this point all the people present were kinda getting the feeling that maybe this Stephen guy was making this as a spectacle. The general sentiment was that he was pushing it at this point. Formosus was buried in an unspecified grave for foreigners, which didn't last long, since Stephen felt that this wasn't quite enough, so he had him dug up again, tied to weights and thrown in the river Tiber. At this point people had enough of this trial and Stephen in general, so they jailed him in a cell and subsequently strangled him. Poor Pope Stephen VI. I guess he hadn't heard of the old saying that goes, never speak ill of the dead since they are unable to defend for themselves. Next Pope Romanus annulled all of Stephen's actions, but sadly even he had the life expectancy of an ordinary house mouse. He didn't last even 1 year before he was overthrown. After him came Pope Theodore II, who even though lasted only 20-ish days, was able to retrieve Formosus' body from the river Tiber. The next pope also annulled Cadaver Synod, like the previous one, and also ordered Formosus to be buried in St. Peter's Cathedral. Now the shit show wasn't over yet, since the next pope, Sergius III, overturned the last 2 decisions of popes that overturned Formosus' accusation. You feel me? So basically Formosus was once again guilty and Cadaver Synod was in effect. I mean, I told you it was a shit show, didn't I? After this, to this day, no one, not a single pope, came out to say anything publicly on the matter. Basically behind closed doors, all of them reaffirmed that what happened to Formosus was highly unethical and illegal, but not in the open, of course. This is the only reason why he is not regarded as an anti-pope and still lays in St. Peter's Cathedral to this day. This all started in 866 when Formosus was sent to Bulgaria, and ended in 910 when Pope Sergio III annulled the previous annullations. That much drama in only 44 years. What a time to be alive was then. Now I really like this one and I hope you also did. And if you did, let me remind you to once again subscribe and like the video. This is it for me for today. Hopefully I'll see you soon, in a few days for the next video. And until then, see ya.